is probably one of the more controversial questions, right, about Chinese biotech. And it's actually a very important topic because it is an area where there's going to be potentially a change in leadership in the industry between the US and China. And just to give us perspective, you go back a couple of decades, Chinese at best were making raw materials, APIs, that sort of thing, whatever. And they grew and added capabilities. And then the Chinese government, when they said, manufacturing 2025, the 5 industries they put in their industrial policy, biotech was one of them, which surprised a lot of people, but they were very serious about it. And a few facts. The number of novel drugs in China entering into development last year hit 1,250, far surpassing the EU and nearly catching up with the US that as of last year had 1,440. If you also look at data on the shift, it's a dramatic what is happening with the Chinese. They had a disastrous regulatory system for a long time, a lot of controversy, so forth, and they had to revamp their whole equivalent, the FDA, and the quality issues were a problem, and they really worked on it. But a number of people now feel that China is knocking on the door, even if you just look at the data in terms of the quality and the number of new drugs that are being developed. And there are a number of reasons. One, government has subsidized a lot. Two, the clinical trial regulatory process there is much faster. The other is the availability for patients for clinical trials is easier. They got a huge population, but also there are fewer constraints that they have. On the other side, there's the issues of, well, gee, if you do clinical trials with just Chinese patients, to what extent can they be applied if you're going to apply the FDA? And right now, it's still up in the air, right? The FDA saying, we're not automatically going to take data that's based on purely Chinese patient population as adequate for submission in the US. So this is a very important issue. Of course, as was mentioned earlier, one of the unfortunate challenges is the cutting the funding of the NIH, the FDA, things and so forth, which have actually hindered the US drug development industry and caused a lot of people to leave the country, the scientists and so forth. So that hasn't helped. So really the question really now is, I guess it's not whether the Chinese biotech and pharma industry is making progress, because that is just factually true. The question is, what speed will that develop relative to the US? And do we think that that they will surpass the US, at some point? It certainly happened in a number of other industries, right? And some that people are worried. They're worried about the auto industry, right? Whether the Chinese will dismantle the US and European auto industry. So let's start out, no particular order. Who would like to express their opinion first? So we just, okay, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, it might be good for me to start out kind of from just what I'm seeing in the industry and from a coverage standpoint. We're seeing a couple of different vantage points. So now on one end, we're seeing, Peter, like you said, the influx of investment and in R&D out of China. It's reflected in a lot of our coverage, our annual top 50 company rankings. Have received an influx of Chinese companies that are climbing up the ladder. We're getting some new, China-based companies making the list. you hear about the partnerships taking place between big pharma Pfizer's and some of these biotechs in China, 3S Bio, some of these deals taking place. So we're definitely on top of all that coverage, and we see increasing activity there. On the other side, there's also the kind of vantage point from the execs, the global, big pharma executives that we talked about, the kind of dilemma that they have in making these tariffs and the calls to bring innovation, bring manufacturing and stuff to the U.S. The supply chain challenges and all that are impacting their strategies as far as China. Just the geopolitical risks that are taking place, so the U.S. and China trade wars, so they're kind of talking about how they're being told to shift a lot of activity out of China, APIs and stuff like that, but they don't see the need to move everything. They see the advantages there, like we're talking about the R&D and all that stuff. So right now, I guess they're kind of still doing a wait and see approach with tariffs and all that, but definitely a lot of good and definitely some uncertainty too from pharma. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I echo. I think the pace definitely catching up with the US. A lot of people will say it's really around just Me Too drugs. I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, some of the innovations coming out of China is actually pretty innovative and things that are hard to do. I think the timing is just bad in terms of the reduction of funding in the US. And quite frankly, what's happening in China doesn't even include the full power of AI. It's more brute force today. So when you add that piece, more AI, more automation, which they should inherently be good at, I would think. I think the delta in terms of what we do and what they do is going to increase. But look, at the end of the day, there's better approaches to making therapeutics. It's for patients fundamentally. So I think as long as patients win, that's great. I think it also puts the onus on the biotech industry in the US and also pharma to, I was saying, to really innovate and really, we've seen in pharma, there's, your head of R&D changes and then your budget changes and your areas of focus changes, and no matter even with AI, it's still a 10-year time frame that one should be looking at and not a 3 to 5 year time frame. And so we really need to get serious. Like I look at companies like J&J, I'm biased, but also Lilly, they stayed in the game in neuro and obesity and diabetes with a lot of failures, but the inherent know-how, really letting R&D speak for itself, the scientists first, some of the contrarian views, being comfortable with that, even though it meant maybe the commercial models didn't look right. But you have a good drug and there's differentiation, I think it will work out. So I think we need to go back to the basics, the fundamental basics of value creation, less bureaucracy. Where is value created? It's in R&D. Let's add newer approaches in a way that's meaningful and, like you said, Peter, intelligent. When it comes to AI, it doesn't help in everything, but it does in some areas. China is going to incorporate that, and then you don't want to have more of a gap in terms of not just speed and cost, but you go from brute force to more predictive approaches. Game on. I mean, I think we need to just focus more on innovation and less on, having been in large companies and other companies, less on the politics. It's going to get in our way.
A lot has been said, so I won't try to repeat things, but yeah, I do one thing I will repeat is that ultimately if it's better for patients, that's a good thing. Hopefully we can collaborate together. It's not a competition, but it's actually hopefully we work together and take the best of both worlds. But I would say what the Chinese ecosystem has done is really, we always say fail fast and fail cheap. They've somehow figured out how to do that faster and cheaper. The barrier to making new molecules and just putting them into humans seems a lot lower. I think the safety part is still there. But getting a molecule into a portfolio in big pharma can sometimes take 6 months to a year or something like that, right? Whereas I think in China it looks like they're just making the molecule, if it passes GLP tox, bringing it to humans, and then you figure out if it works or not, or if it's better or not. And so that's one thing that's really been impressive. The second one, as you mentioned, Peter, is the regulatory landscape. They've really actually worked together, I think, with all the investigators in the ecosystem to make it faster. Here, my concern is that there's no one person overseeing the whole US system, and so everyone's pulling in multiple different directions. So hopefully we can figure out how to more work together on that. I did hear, just for example, in China, it used to be that cell and gene therapy or investigator-initiated trials didn't have to go through the CEFDA, and so were done faster, and now they just came out with a new policy. If you really have a breakthrough medicine, you can even do an IIT rather than going through the Chinese FDA. So the regulatory agency is already trying to speed up even more, whereas we seem to be slowing down. The third thing I would just say is, China graduates more STEM students per year than the rest of the world, every year. So the talent pool obviously is huge, and the cost, I hear, of a chemist is like $30,000 a year. So we do need to learn how to compete in that space, but hopefully work together with China to ultimately benefit patients.
I want to be very careful that we don't get into this, okay, they're gonna take over and so forth and cut things. An analogy was, you remember Japan Inc.? Remember in the 80s and 90s, everybody said, the Japanese are gonna take over and so forth because they had, supply chain innovation and everything else. But it didn't happen, and for a lot of reasons. So let me try to counterbalance by mentioning some things that maybe would slow them down. One is intellectual property, right? There is still a serious problem in China in terms of protecting intellectual property. And I remember my wife was chief trade negotiator for the US with China and Japan under Bush Sr. and Clinton. And it was all about intellectual property, right? And the Chinese have made progress, but they're still, the system is not great. Ironically, some of the biggest complaints are Chinese companies complaining about other Chinese companies, as opposed to Western companies complaining about Chinese companies copying. So on the intellectual property side, to the extent that you have an opinion, what do you see the situation is? And in fact, it's relevant because in many cases you're saying, gee, do I want to try to do clinical, do I want to get approval in China, for example, right? And expose my intellectual property. Any comments on the IP side in China?
I can just start. I think that many VCs now are not being public about their deals or about starting new companies on particular targets, so they don't have to reveal the target. And then there was an American Association of Cancer Research meeting, pre-meeting this year, where the pharma companies presented their portfolios. And I did hear afterwards that no one wanted to talk about new targets. So everyone looked like they were all working on the same targets, but that's because they didn't want the competition, i.e. in China, to start working on the novel targets. So from an IP perspective, that's one approach that people are already taking.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that is incredibly true. You're seeing that, especially for Recursion, a lot of the work that we do, novel biology, novel targets, even things that haven't gone through the functional validation, it's our partnership, we don't want to disclose anything. I think more, and same thing for us, we don't do the same. But for instance, we have a program in RBM39, we published, it's in phase 1 now, and submitted some of the IP paperwork and stuff. And I remember within 2 weeks, there were 3 companies in China working on that target.
Yeah.
Within 2 weeks. And that, impressive. But I think the way we think about IP from a composition of matter, people are starting to think about that from a biology perspective as well. And I do wonder, not worry, wonder, because some pharma companies like, Roche, Genentech, and others, they're really focused on research and development. But a lot of pharma companies are much more search and development. They don't really do research. And they get a lot of it from maybe China now and maybe US biotech. How would that work out, right? Because, maybe you're licensing in an asset. And I've heard of examples where, the phase 1 is done in China, which can be done really, really quickly, so much faster than us. And then you file for your IND in the US, and then it's licensed. And having a lot of challenges with very, very similar compounds in China. So like bringing that in, you're paying all of that money, but you can't really protect your IP appropriately. So there's apparently a lot of risk on that front that's coming up as well, that I've heard of.
Yeah, I've seen that too as well, and the kind of Pharma Exec, we work with, global consultants, Simon Kucher being one. I think, they provide some good analysis on the innovation scene that we've been talking about in China, and they kind of outline some of the pre-competitive things that are taking place there, with, the consortiums around new technology, maybe some incubator things, and maybe, can kind of, at least initially, evade some of the IP issues, but like you mentioned, gene therapy is an increasing focus, and biotechs, ADC, the different things with biologics. So that's kind of cool to see too, that's contributing, the more collective thought out there too,
One other flaw with the Chinese system, which they call capitalism with a socialist flair or something like that, is they're actually doing a flawed imitation of the Japanese industrial policy from the 70s and 80s, which is you tell everyone, well, I've got to protect my market because I'm an emerging market. Although China seems to have been an emerging market for a really long time. But then you build barriers, you loosen the rules in favor, you do things like, if you want to be in China, you've got to do a joint venture with a local owner, right, or a local company. You do all these things that are unfair for the leaders outside your country to penetrate your market. At the meantime, you subsidize, and you create lots of competitors in your own market and so forth, right? That was the Japanese model. Korea's followed the same model, right? India tried, but it's kind of hard for India because they got all sorts of other structural problems. But China's followed the same thing. But here's the flaw. It doesn't work in every industry. So for example, electric vehicles. Okay, everybody says the Chinese electric vehicles are advanced, they're lower cost, they're gonna crush the Western competition. Okay, maybe, but there are 502 Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers. And that's about 475 more than you need to be healthy. And so there's this, and only about 3 out of the 502 are making money. So you look at it on one side, from the outside, you say, man, we're gonna get crushed. But from the inside, it's a miserable experience. So what's the end game there? Good question, right? It may turn out that everyone loses, right? The Chinese and the Western auto manufacturers. So one of the questions is, will that happen in biotech? It's clearly they're following some of the same formula, right? Just encourage, fund, subsidize, make it easy, butter, and then block. Because a lot of Western pharma companies were very reluctant to pull their products into China for the reasons they said. So I guess the question for our panelists here is, what principle will apply in the drug industry? Will it be a big success, like solar panels, right? Solar panels, that's how they've crushed it, and now then they consolidate down to fewer, and now they dominate, right? Or rare earths, right? Or will it be a failure like they've had in lots of things like real estate, whatever, right? So what's the opinion?
I think they will have a top 10 pharma company within the next 5 to 10 years. And then I think they're going to have a thriving ecosystem. I read this book called AI Superpowers. That was about the early 2010s.
Right.
And that's the model, right? This is a book about how they created a ton of tech companies, and then out of that came Baidu, Tencent, and so on and so forth. I think similar model, right? You had 500 companies competing, winnowed down to the top 3. They did it with the EV market. I think they're similarly doing it with biotech. at one point, I think there were 30, 40 PD-1 molecules in development, and you're like, why does the world need 30 to 40 PD-1 molecules? I don't think it was because they all thought they would succeed, but they definitely trained the workforce to do drug development. And then now what I hear locally is that they don't even consider us sometimes as the competition, they consider each other as the competition. So I happen to I think they'll be successful.
Well, electronic vehicles, if you ask them who you worry about, it's other Chinese companies, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I was saying before, our data is proving that they're increasing their presence globally in pharma. There's some Chinese companies in the 30s and 40s right now, and moving up as far as revenue, yearly revenue. And they're competing, with the likes of Merck. We did with the B1. With their testing of the novel Keytruda sort of P1 approach. So that you probably see more cases of that occurring. So it doesn't seem to be going away. And I think the US-based companies in Europe realize that, and they know it's not going to go away, and they're trying to do their own, looking at their own, strategies there. That's why they're doing some partnering and things like that. But yeah, there be issues in IP that Peter mentioned, and other things to figure out. But yeah, I think it's really good. They're really moving up.
Yeah, I think in the next decade, at least 1 or 2 of the top 10 pharma companies are going to be from China. And it could be like a China, Singapore, Korea, like a little bit of a hub network that way, because you're seeing good innovation even from Singapore and Korea. Another Taiwan even just was looking at a company there. I think maybe one of the companies could be more AI-based. I'm not going to say which one. And I do think, even if you look at 10 years ago, the ranking of the pharma companies has changed quite a bit, and the ones that are still on top are the ones that have done sustained R&D innovation. I want to emphasize that. I remember in J&J, the number of changes that would happen every 5 years. You do that, stop, start. You can't do that.
Right.
You just can't do that. And so I think we really need to look at our strategy. A lot of licensing can get you pretty far, and I think that will continue. It's going to be an important node. But I also do think that, sustained innovation, investment, the pricing aspect is completely changing. The way you commercialize, which is D2C, is completely changing. How will that evolve if you're a US-based company trying to, capture the market in China? And there's a lot of questions to be asked there. So I think there's a holistic sort of upending of the strategy if you're going to compete with companies like that.
So before I open up to questions from the audience, I'm going to do something a little different. And that is, I'm going to ask everyone to vote their opinion by raising their hand, including the people up here. And you have 3 choices. And by the way, the question is when will Chinese pharma industry pass the US or the West? And you have 3 choices. In the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, or never, right? So I want everyone to vote. So those are 3, and the question is, when will the Chinese pharma industry as a whole, right, match let's just make it simple, say the US. So 3 choices, within 10 years, within 20 years, or never. So who thinks it's within 10 years? Who thinks it's within 20 years? And who thinks never? All right. For those of you online, the overwhelming majority was never. And to be honest with you, I hope they're right? I hope they're right, because that would be one of the things. And you've got to be very careful about underestimating the US, because every 10 years, there's a prediction the US industry is toast. Like in the 70s, you said we're toast. And they found some way to, to invigorate themselves and pivot to other things. So rather than manufacturing, services and technology and so forth. I can't tell you what it is, but I'm hoping that the group here, who voted differently than I did, right, that it's never. So let's open it up to questions. Any questions from the audience? Hold on.
I was just gonna say.
Speak it to the microphone, but identify yourself for the record.
Peter Howe, Clear Scientific, I'm the founder and CFO. The reason I said never is because it's probabilistic in my mind, right? 20%, 10 years, 20%, 20 years, and 60% never. So I go never. It's not that I don't think it could happen, it's just that there's a lot of other things that could happen,
Yeah, okay.
so.
There's someone else who had that was not a question, by the way, so you don't have to answer.
I was just,
The second person?
nuance, a little bit of nuance.
You missed my comment earlier, because you hadn't right. I said there's a famous professor who had a sign behind his desk that said, please phrase any question as a compliment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I sort of agree with you here. I think there's a lot of other things that could happen economically where I think the CCP is going to collapse over the next 5 years. And I think if that were to happen, I think the whole game changes. And so that's how I'm approaching it. Not necessarily just looking at pharma alone, but weighing in all the other economic and political, things that could happen. But my question for you, as a company, my company BioRegis Therapeutics, which I'm co-founder of, we have patents in China, and it was a little confusing to me when you were discussing the implications of protecting your IP, how that applies to a company that has patents and potentially could partner with a Chinese company. And I don't know if you have seen anything that would shed light on what the potential risks are there, instead of just entering the market.
Yeah. Okay. You did phrase that as a question, and by the way, you heard it first. The Chinese government's going to collapse, according to our enemy here. Any answer to his question?
The only thing I would say is just be careful of patent busting from other companies. Patent busting.
I mean, that's what I was referring to before. In a couple of cases, compounds were licensed in, and then just to have the patent be busted. The patent originated in China. The asset was licensed after a phase 1 study in China, IND approval in the US, and it was licensed in. And within months, the patent was busted several times, and not even like a sophisticated busting. It's like an unsophisticated busting. And those assets are now in the portfolio in China, and other pharma companies, if they don't do due diligence, could license it, but they're progressing it forward. And I think it's just a breach of trust more than anything else. I don't think there's a huge concern in terms of those assets being licensed in and there being challenges in the US, but it's just, how do you know? That's one. The other cases, in some cases, in diligence, you see some of the phase 1 data where there were quality challenges with it.
I'm talking about the other way around. If a Chinese company were to license in our drug, let's say,
Yeah,
and we have patents in China for the drug.
I haven't seen any examples of that where there have been challenges today.
Yeah, I don't think they would take your IP. I think it's just another 10 companies might look at the patents and then bust them.
And bust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that can happen outside of China.
Right.
Okay.
I have a question. I can do with that, don't worry.
No, the virtual people can't hear you. We don't care about the people in the room. We care about
All right, very good. So first of all, I just wanted to make a comment. The reason why I say never is that, US has that mojo that attracts all the best scientists. So look here around. So I think, even if there's some fantastic Chinese scientists, but they will end up at some point working here in this country. So that's the reason why I'm saying the attraction from US is stronger than ever. So that's my comment. That's the reason why I say, well, it will never happen, because they will be working here rather than over there.
But that's why a lot of people are worried about this $100,000 fee for H-1B.
Yeah.
That, I think, is a really, honestly, bad idea.
Yeah.
Right, because, you know.
It will change. It will not last.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right.
And then I had a question for Najat.
You heard it
here.
first. Chinese government collapsing, H-1B
Yeah.
fees going down, right? Breaking news.
So I had a question for Najat. So everything that you're doing is fantastic. It's just really it's so great to hear and to listen to. But I was thinking, in the past, let's say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, a lot of companies were working on taking data, clinical data existing, and trying to work on repurposing drugs. So don't you think, with what we have now, with the tool that you have, it would be a great way to adjust, adapt, and eventually get new product faster for existing condition? I don't know, just a thought. And by the way, William, I bought two examples of your book.
Oh, thanks.
Soon to be a New York Times bestseller, I actually brought it too. Peter did a really good intro. I couldn't help, but I loved, just as a side note, I love reading the lineage of drugs and where they come from.
Yeah.
Right, both like just the scientific, but also the non-scientific, it changes hands so many times, which ties very well to what you just asked around repurposing. Look, I think a lot of companies have done repurposing. We're not focused on that right now because I think, look, you want to be able to optimize the compound to the extent you can. We have those capabilities to do it. However, I'm always open to opportunistic in licensing. For instance, I'll look at some asset and then we'll look at that target in our maps and we're like, instead of going to this patient population, there's an adjacent one, or a specific patient stratification play we can do that hasn't been thought of before. Or in many cases, we've looked at assets which are being studied in oncology, but with some tweaking could be in immunology. So that is something, I have in the back of my mind, but just pure repurposing, I mean, a lot of companies did that, but then they suffer from some of the inherent challenges with the molecule in the clinic. I'd rather just not do that. I'd rather just put it through that really use the entirety of our platform capabilities.
Yeah, I was just looking at that as a low-hanging fruit that could be reached, a lot faster than, all the
Oh, yeah.
that you're doing.
But if you look at a lot of the first generation tech companies, that's what they did, and it didn't really work out that well. And I think some of it is, I think to what William Powell said, some of it is like not understanding the biology well enough. Some of it is like, okay, there's some, like if you're taking an oncology drug, trying to make it chronic, but then it's got all of the therapeutic effects.
Yeah.
Exactly, the tox is not reasonable in chronic diseases. It's like, there's a lot of I don't know. One thing I have appreciated as I've gotten older is, yes, you can have the best model, the best data, but the art of knowing what can be a good drug, having that drug hunter nose, which someday maybe we'll have an agent that can do it, not yet. What you have as an example is phenomenal. And I think it can be underestimated in what we do because the risk bar is much higher in life science than anywhere else because you're actually making things that go into your bodies and can have all this sort of safety issues. So, yeah.
I still think that it would be a great thing to have a fresher look with the tools we have available today. Because
I mean, a lot of companies are starting to do that now. But yeah.
Yeah, people have been repurposing drugs for decades.
Sorry?
But I guess your point being, there might be some tools like AI that would make it, more efficient to repurpose. And that's probably true, right? That's probably true. But I think what Najat said is fundamentally, if you want to create new areas of great promise with a lot of IP protection, you've got to invent something new.
Of course.
So look, first of all, I don't know about you, but today's been a fantastic day. I mean, I tell you, the reaction people have to the agenda, first of all, before anyone arrived was, wow, what an incredible set of topics and speakers. But it's really been a wonderful day. And I think every topic, these are all different topics. They're, if you look at our agenda from last year, 2/3 of it totally different, right? Why? Because the world was different a year ago than it is today. So first of all, I want to thank all the speakers, including the ones that are currently comatose because they've been drinking bourbon all day, and so forth. And our colleague, Dr. Spielberg, who's trying to figure out why he's got, stomach pain. Want to thank all of them for doing such a wonderful job. But I also hope that this day has accomplished what we hope, which is that you come away with 3, 4, 5 insights that help you do a better job of running your company, successfully. And we'll keep doing this as long as people feel that way about it. I'm very sorry about the government shutdown and FAA and all the people who had to be online so they couldn't enjoy the tiramisu and the filet mignon, but hopefully that won't happen next year. But I want to thank all of the speakers, and including those who've left, and I want to thank all of you as well.